In the way of just an outline of where we'd like to go this morning, first and foremost, I want to congratulate the speakers yesterday that covered a variety of topics relative to qualitative traits, genetic conditions, and parentage verification. Between Andrew and Eliza and Matthias, the stage was nicely set for a little deeper dive into application of genomic technologies as it relates to our high-density 50K offering. What I'm going to concentrate on for the time we have this morning is the performance traits. The traits such as calving ease and growth and carcass merit and maternal merit, and how the technology can be applied. But what we're really talking about is how we all adapt to new innovation. And so times change, don't they? They change, and be it fashion, or be it our cell phone technology or computers, we're always in an ever-changing state of technology. Just as we want our cattle to be adaptable to changes in the environment, be it drought or rainfall, we as breeders also need to be adaptable to the needs of our customers. And so I've got a little exercise to start off with this morning to test your ability to adapt to change. So I'm going to show you the next slide that has a paragraph of information on it. And I just ask you to try to read through it as best you can to see how well your mind adapts to a few little subtle changes in the English language. So the question is, can you read this? Can you read this? I see a lot of lips moving, and isn't it amazing how fast you can adapt to these changes? If you'll notice, the 7 is really a replacement for a T, 1 is a replacement for an I, and 5 is a replacement for an S. So this message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things. And to spare you this part, only certain people can read this. So already I hope you've proven to yourself that mentally you can adapt pretty nicely to change. And such is the case with all technologies. And just as our animals and their performance are normally distributed with the majority average, some of us are inclined to be innovators or early adopters, and some of us later adopters. And I don't know about for you, but for me, it really depends on the technology. I can be on both ends of this curve. My colleagues make fun of me for using my old BlackBerry technology and not a smartphone. And in that sense, I'm really very much a laggard. But at the same time, certain technologies, when the price is right and when the power and delivery exceeds the cost, so when the benefit's there, it's easy to adopt new technologies. And that's really, I think, what we're going to visit about this morning is how can you use this new technology to make better decisions and to position your customers to make better decisions over time. I like this slide. It was taken about 2 weeks ago by my colleague, Dr. Jason Osterstock in Brazil, South America, where this producer was selecting replacement heifers, and he had the genomic and the genetic evaluation information on a big screen as he was sorting ins and outs. Definitely an example of an early adopter, an innovator. Now we know we can always be either on the leading edge or on the bleeding edge, but this slide serves to remind me that oftentimes, if we appropriately adapt and adopt new technology, we can get a competitive advantage, can't we? And that's, I think, the fun thing about the technology that I'm about to share with you. So I assume most of you are generally familiar with how the HD50K technology works. It's all pretty simple in that it begins with a hair sample sent to the Angus, Australia office. If you've not already seen it, I'll pass it around, but the magic of the technology is really the Illumina bovine SNP50 bead chip, which is about the size of a microscope slide. And just for those of you that like to look under the hood to understand how things work, basically each one of these wells on the microscope slide is pre-programmed with 50,000 microscopic beads that contain very special chemistry, such that when the DNA interacts with the bead, a chemical reaction occurs, and it tells us the genotype of the animal at that specific location on the animal's genetic makeup. So we know then whether the animal is homozygous, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive at each one of those locations. We then collaborate with our partners at either Angus Australia or the American Angus Association in the case of the product that I deal with, to train those markers to know and become informative as to the impact that has on the genetic merit of different performance traits. And so we produce a genomic breeding value that then feeds into the genetic evaluation. And that's really the key to making this technology work. The collaboration with the time-tested historic technology that blends pedigree and performance information with the new technology that includes the markers and the information the markers contain, feeding in to create a more accurate prediction earlier in life of the animal's genetic merit. So we're blending pedigree with the animal's own performance, and we're jump-starting the accuracy with the 50,000 markers so that we can achieve higher accuracy earlier in an animal's life. And we're blending the old and the new technology together. Each week at the American Angus Association, our partners blend over 17 million pedigree records with over 22 million performance records, and now 50,000 DNA test results, 30,000 of which are now HD50K, to produce over 62 million EPDs. So very much so, the information has been now the key value determinant of animals in the marketplace. And it amazes me how, Peter, we can have so many pieces of information now going in to empower our EPDs for each individual trait prediction. To just tell you a little bit about the AGI version of the technology, similar to the Australian version, it includes parentage verification of the recorded parents. I'll talk also a little bit later about how we report the markers for a commercial Angus product called GeneMax to enable multi-sire assignment of parentage. But then the features of our HD50K as distributed by our partners AGI includes genomic predictions in the form of genomic enhanced EPDs for all of the traits in white, and then it includes standalone genomic predictions for residual feed intake. A new trait that was just implemented in January is heifer pregnancy, so probability of heifer pregnancy during a fixed time breeding season, and then also tenderness. So through this collaboration, we're able to deliver genomic enhanced EPDs as well as standalone genomic predictions to do two things: improve the accuracy of selection for the EPD traits, but then enable selection for some very difficult, hard to measure, and time-consuming traits. So relative to what we talked about to begin this morning on adoption, here's how adoption has unfolded to date in North America. These bars are on a quarterly basis, so Q1 2011 was when the product was introduced. Q1 2013 would be the latest January, February, March finished time point. So there's a couple of things I wanted to share with you this morning about this trend of adoption. And that is that in the first quarter, right during and prior to our bull sales season, we had a lot of customers testing the technology. They were dipping their foot in the water, trying to learn about what the technology delivered and whether it made sense, whether it passed the smell test, so to speak. And then two things, actually three important things happened in the fourth quarter of 2012. And I think these would follow things that we've witnessed in other technologies such as cell phones and computers. One of the biggest motivators was the price dropped from $135 per animal to $75 per animal in the first quarter of 2012. So it became more affordable to a wider range of breeders. The second thing that happened in late 2012 was we had a new calibration for the product. So we had 12,000 tested animals contribute to the training of the marker information versus only about 3,000 animals. And so the amount of explained variation the technology delivered increased. So we got an improvement in the value proposition. Lower cost, more explained variation. And then the third thing that happened was the competing product also had new correlations that declined because of erosion of efficacy. And so we had a three-pronged benefit that now has resulted in the last quarter of having 700 people test right at 9,000 animals. And the big shift now, as we've gotten through bull sales season, in the last month has been that breeders are testing females. So they're testing primarily replacement heifers, and we'll talk about some of the benefits of that here in a minute. So similar to your EBVs, our breeders and commercial users of Angus genetics use EPDs, and they rank animals, don't they? And are expressed in the units of the trait that they are measured in. And those differences add up, though, to real dollars, don't they? So if you select for a simple trait like weaning weight, and you compare two bulls, bull number A is going to deliver in our market today roughly $2,500 more net return over its lifetime in the 100 calves or so it produces than the bull B. But the unfortunate thing is that young bulls typically have low accuracy. So there's more error associated with their EPDs. So similar to EBVs and accuracies here, we have measures of accuracy in the United States as well. We do use BIF accuracy, which is very conservative, and so the numbers will be smaller for you to look at. But the message is still the same. Essentially what we're doing with the 50,000 markers is we're moving an animal from, in our case, 0.05 to 0.10 accuracy up to about 0.3 accuracy. And if the width of these bands represents the amount of error that might be associated with an EPD for a young non-parent, what we're doing is we're shaving off or reducing error in the EPD by about 25 to 1/3 of the possible change. So we're getting rid of that error. So we're enabling you as breeders to make fewer selection mistakes and your commercial bull customers to make fewer mistakes in the bulls that they purchase for specific purposes. You might ask, well, what's really going on behind the scenes? How is this really happening? And really this slide, I think, illustrates that. If you look at a pedigree, a sire would have a pair of chromosomes, a sample of which would be passed on to offspring. Each given Angus dam has a pair of chromosomes, which is passed on to offspring. Each sperm is different, each egg is different. And really what we're doing with this technology is we're tracking sampling. We're tracking whether or not this animal inherited a good piece of chromosome for a given trait or an undesirable piece of chromosome for a given trait. And we're doing that at 50,000 locations across the makeup of the animal's genetic merit. And there's about 20 to 25,000 genes that affect most of the performance traits. So we're really just tracking the flow of these fragments of DNA so that we can be informed as to whether this animal got a good or an unfavorable sample of genes from its genetic makeup. So I know by the looks on your face after sitting through several presentations that you're on the edge of your seats with excitement about EPDs and accuracies. Oftentimes when we talk to commercial Angus bull buyers in the US, it's pretty easy to put them asleep. And for me, EPDs aren't necessarily always the most exciting. But I've really enjoyed your Aussie League football, and our college football is really exciting. And so we like to try to teach adoption of this technology and EPD technology in general through the form of an analogy or a simile. And just as I'm told, Swinburne has tips at the beginning of the season, he's making predictions. And you might have that analogy be one of pedigree of a team. So a team that had a good record last year, that had strong coaches that are returning to the program, that just has a reputation as a winner, that perhaps recruited some new players that are particularly talented. Those are all things that are contributing to the preseason poll, just as pedigree information contributes to the genes the animal has the opportunity to inherit as a young non-parent. So to dig a little bit deeper, the preseason college football poll last year as we started the season would have ranked Alabama as the #1 team. Incidentally, a lineman from Alabama is from Australia and was recently drafted in the NFL draft earlier this week. But this would be an estimate sort of based on pedigree, if you will. But if you roll the season forward to the last games of the season and the final rankings, you'll notice that there were some changes in our college football, just as I presume there are changes in most years in your Aussie Rules Football League. For us, though, Alabama started the season #1, and they also ended the season #1. And I think the analogy with our traditional genetic evaluation technology is that it has served our industry and continues to serve our industry extremely well across the globe. When we have the value of accurate pedigrees and lots of performance information for birth and weaning and growth, as well as carcass and maternal traits, we can do a great job ranking animals, especially if they have lots of progeny that have contributed. But unproven young non-parents haven't played any games yet, have they? So sometimes, just as in football, when we have unexpected surprises, University of Southern California, for example, was ranked #2 before the season and weren't even ranked in the top 20 at the end of the season. We as breeders don't want this to happen to our commercial bull customers, do we? We don't necessarily want to sell them a bull that doesn't live up to the genetic predictions that the bull was purchased on. And we don't want to create that bad experience. We also, though, if you're breeders, you also know that sometimes you have inclination that some animals are diamonds in the rough, that even though they may not have performed and exactly looked the part, they may be much better than you thought. And such was the case with our last year's college football season, where Notre Dame ended up the season #3, but was ranked outside of the top 20. So the analogy here is that as breeders, if we can find these special animals early in life so that they don't get lost, we can propagate them more widely, we can sell them for more dollars, and we can use them to advance our genetics by virtue of discovering those. So there's some similarities, aren't there, between sports teams and preseason and postseason rankings. And what this technology really delivers is it gets us about 1/4 or 1/3 of the way through the season. It delivers the equivalent of initial progeny proof prior to the time that such is available so that we can make better decisions. So let me talk just a little bit about the results of the new calibration that was based on 12,000 animals, because yesterday the very first question was, does it work? How well does it really help in the predictions? And so this slide is meant to do that. Each of these traits are here, Cavendish direct and birth weight, and hopefully these are self-explanatory. This would be the correlation that was computed by our partners at Angus Genetics, Inc., and it's the correlation between the genomic predictions, what we call the MVPs, and then also all of the phenotypic records that are out there in the herd book and the database of Angus Genetics, Inc. So it's the correlation between what we predict and what's really observed in the way of progeny performance. So most of these correlations range from about 0.5 to 0.7. In parentheses, though, is a measure that may be easier to understand, and that is the proportion of explained variation. So if you think of a pie, and the whole pie being all of the additive genetic variation in a population, this number would explain the size of the slice of the pie that the 50,000 markers explain. So for a trait like birth weight, it would explain roughly 40% of the variation in the differences in true genetic merit among animals. When we incorporate the marker information, we also change the EPD. And so our friends and partners at AGI have helped us quantify the amount the EPD changes. So for a trait like birth weight, on average, animals will be roughly plus or minus 0.8 or about 1 pound from what their initial prediction based on pedigree would have been. However, at the extremes, we've seen animals go up as much as 3 pounds in birth weight and down as much as 3 pounds in birth weight. So that can make all the difference in the world as to whether we correctly identify a bull, say as a heifer bull, versus one that should be more wisely used on cows. This average accuracy value then would quantify the accuracy based on pedigree plus the marker information. So in our system, we're jump-starting animals from 0.05 accuracy based on pedigree to somewhere in the 0.25 to 0.35 range of accuracy. Now, when we talk to commercial producers, that's not very meaningful to them. So we've attempted to put that in units that are easier to understand, and those units are progeny equivalents. So these would be the progeny. So let's just take weaning weight, for example. It would take 19 animals with weaning weights in contemporary groups passing through the genetic evaluation in order to achieve the same level of accuracy that having the 50,000 markers on board would have. So as you can see, in most cases, what it does, what the technology delivers, is an initial progeny proof. For sires, depending on the number of cows you expose a sire to, it's a nice part of the first calf crop, isn't it? For dams, since a dam rarely produces more than 10, 12 calves in their lifetime, you can see that for dams, it's roughly the equivalent of way more than a lifetime of natural calf production feeding into the accuracy of her EPDs. I mentioned at the start that we've had a number of learnings relative to recalibrating this product and needing to be diligent about always adapting this technology as more and more animals are tested and more performance information becomes available. This slide, I think, exemplifies the power of having lots and lots of DNA markers versus a relatively few number of DNA markers. So we contrast here the difference in explained variation based on the new calibration for 50K versus the Igenity 384 profile. And in dairy, as well as in Angus and our other applications, having an abundance of markers have taught us that we're then able to recalibrate the product to explain more and more variation over time. Targeted panels are powerful. They're very, very useful, but they need to be reassembled and recalibrated very frequently in order to maintain their efficacy over time. So let's just talk a little bit here as we close about how breeders in North America are using the technology. As you know, sire selection drives breed improvement from both the breeder perspective as well as commercial users of Angus genetics. What we're really trying to do is turn incomplete and imperfect information into information that's more useful. A year ago, this would be what a bull sale catalog would have typically looked like in the U.S. when information from the marker platform was not used. But now, more and more, since we're seeing greater adoption, what we're seeing is the genomic information also included, such that the pedigree of the animal, the own performance and group information of the animal, and all the genomic information are feeding into the accuracy of each EPD. And as we work with breeders and commercial users, we always advise that whenever there is a genomic EPD available, to use the genomic enhanced EPD, because that includes all the information, the genomics as well as the pedigree and the own performance. This information down here about the percent rank of the animal based solely on 50K is useful because you as breeders want to diagnose what impact the markers are having on the EPD as it was incorporated. And to simplify then, what more and more we are encouraging commercial users of Angus genetics to use are the economic indexes. The $B in the case of covering those traits that are feedlot and carcass, and the $, weaning to cover those traits for producers retaining replacements. This happens to be the first $1 million bull. He traded at Express Ranches for $340,000 for 1/3 interest. And more, what we've seen is that in order for an AI company to be interested in a bull, they really must have the marker information on board to help minimize the risk associated with such expensive investment decisions. I love the tool here on the Angus Australia website that enables you to put in selection criteria for traits and accuracy and pick animals that do lots of things well. We've done that exercise to help explain to commercial producers how the technology works using independent culling levels. If you think of how animals are distributed, some animals, if we were going to pick those with birth weight EPDs less than average, would be below this line. Some animals, if we were trying to avoid those that we may not want to use on heifers, would be above this line. And I show this just as a precursor for a little selection exercise that we did to show how decisions can be different if you have information on board relative to the genomics or if you don't have. And so this slide was developed for us by our partners at Angus Genetics Inc. We 50K tested 463 young sire prospects, and then we selected them based on their EPDs before genomic enhancement and their EPDs after genomic enhancement. And our selection criteria was below average birth weight, above average weaning weight, and above average marbling. So if you select them before, we would have selected 95 out of the 463 bulls. But after the marker information had impacted, the time-tested technology did pretty well in that 62 of those bulls still would have been selected. But we resurrected about 43 bulls from those that would have been culled initially that should have been candidates for selection that the marker information helped to find. Again, we're sorting out sampling. We're in essence playing a few of those teams, those games, to get to higher levels of accuracy. And at the same time, some of the bulls that we selected, we mistakenly selected because they really weren't as good as we thought. So it's an example of how if you're selecting for multiple traits, the technology can get us to a point where the dependability of the information helps us select the most appropriate animals for the given criteria. So relative to sire selection, we're using the technology to more dependably select heifer bulls for calving ease. Since the technology delivers the equivalent of having some daughters in production, it helps us figure out which ones are most suitable for that, as well as for zeroing in on bulls that are most adapted for feedlot and performance traits. On the cow side of the equation, since the technology can deliver the equivalence of more than a lifetime of natural calf production in the form of accuracy, we're seeing it being used to position breeders to make a lifetime of better mating decisions for the cow. So they're amateurizing that $75 investment in the technology out over the 6 or 8 or 10 calves that cow is likely to produce during her lifetime. It also helps us find those really special cows for use in embryo transplant programs, and given the recipient dam effect on performance, it helps us sort out flush mates as to which ones might be strategically sold, retained, or used for a variety of purposes. So it's been fun to see breeders adapt the technology to both their bulls and females. Relative to females, here's the breakdown. It's roughly 60-40 in proportion of bulls versus females, but as we discussed earlier now, we're starting to see more and more adoption on the female side of the equation. Technology can also help us get at the difficult and hard to measure traits, be it feed efficiency and feed intake. As more information accumulates, we'll hope to describe greater levels of variation. Currently, the technology would explain the least amount of variation for these traits as opposed to the others, but it's primarily because we've got such powerful EPDs and databases across the other traits, and we're such limited in our data relative to dry matter intake. Can help us select or at least avoid the troublemakers relative to tenderness and palatability. So the timeline of beef production is long. Really, the technology is just helping us to jumpstart the EPDs so that we have the accuracy on board when the decision is made now, and so that we don't have to do so much corrective mating in the future if we make selection mistakes early. So really, the technology is like an insurance policy, isn't it? When I went to school to study animal breeding, I didn't know I was going to be an insurance salesman, but really, it's insurance. It's similar to an extended warranty. It's similar to giving us a longer range weather forecast that's more accurate than a short range. And it just is helping us reduce breeding risk. I wanted to finish with just a few comments on now a downstream technology that we're using that's very much a companion product to HD50K for Angus seed stock. Just as we have the SureTrack product here in Australia that helps McDonald's track and maintain product integrity, we've been delighted to work with our partners at Certified Angus Beef to build a product for them as well. In January of 2011, they approached us and asked us to collaborate on a product we call GeneMax. And the whole idea here is to have tools that are adapted to the needs at hands of producers. So if we select seed stock based on genomic enhanced EPDs, GeneMax is a tool for the commercial users of Angus genetics to further select replacement heifers and better manage feeder cattle. This is an example really of the very type of collaborations that Zoetis strives for. So if an industry group such as Angus Australia or others has a problem or has a challenge and they want us to collaborate on a genetic solution, we like then working with them to try to scope that out and see if we might be able to work together. And in this case, what we're really trying to do is marry the genetics with our animal health and with CAB's knowledge about best practices among feeder cattle as well as fed cattle operators to produce most efficiently a high proportion of animals that meet the Certified Angus Beef brand specifications primarily for marbling. So this product, different than 50K, is very simple. It includes a GeneMax score that is an economic index for combined genetic merit for gain and grade. It includes individual predictions for each of these. And then, so long as the bull battery has been tested, it matches the specific sire that was in the bull battery to the GeneMax tested offspring that produced that. And so in the case of replacement heifers particularly, you can err on the side of selecting heifers that are out of sires that are strong in the maternal traits. Our largest customer to date for GeneMax has been JBS Five Rivers. And recently they procured about 3,500 heifers that rather than just feed, they are growing and developing and selecting to produce bred replacements to help meet the demand for those in our production whereby we're so depleted on national cow numbers. And JBS Five Rivers understands the advantages in that the difference between high-grade, high-growth cattle and low-grade, low-growth cattle can be as much as $80 difference. So they're using the technology to select heifers that are above average for a combination of gain and grade, to also assign some of the sires such that we can mate them most wisely to the proven Angus AI sires to produce the best calf possible, and then be able to offer superior bred heifers to the marketplace later this year. And we're less evolved in our adoption curve on this product, but we're really excited about how these products can be integrated with one another to complement one another. So just a few quick takeaways. We see adoption among AI sires, donors, top-end sale animals, but now more into the complete sale offerings and into the replacement females and dams. It yields more dependable information for the non-parents upon which to base selection decisions. For females, it's like having a lifetime of performance information on offspring available at the time of mating. And then it also helps us, we're also excited about these targeted panels. So with that, I'd just like to acknowledge some of my colleagues here. If you have questions about this technology, by all means, take advantage of Lachlan, the sales representative who works a good part of Australia, as well as my colleague Matthias and Kirsty. Take advantage of these people as resources to help answer questions. And by all means, we look forward to visiting with you and learning from you about how this technology might best be applied for your breeding programs. Thank you.